Hello and welcome to this new episode of Bootstrapping Your Dreams Show. I'm your host Manoj Agarwal, and today we'll be talking with Dr. Beverly Wright. So, Dr. Wright is the Analytics Strategist at Axis Group and Executive Director for the Center of Applied Business Analytics at the University of South Carolina. Beverly is a sought after professional speaker at well known conferences, presenting on topics such as data science, consumer insights, marketing analytics, and she also publishes articles in a variety of business journals. Dr. Wright hosts Tag Data Talk, a podcast offered by the Technology Association of Georgia, in which she and her interviewees discuss topics such as talent, tools, trends, frameworks, techniques in data science and analytics. Beverly earned a PhD in marketing, a Master of Science degree in analytics methods, and a Bachelor of Business Administration degree in decision sciences from Georgia State University. She has also received a professional research certification from the Marketing Research Association and is currently a certified analytics professional from Informs. With over 20 years of research, analytics, and insights experience from corporate consulting and academia, Beverly maintains an active academic research agenda. Beverly has worked with both nonprofits and for profit businesses, solving some critical business issues using modeling and advanced analytics. She has worked with clients in consultative roles to advance the application of analytics and encourage data driven decisions through analytics and insights. Welcome, Beverly.
Thank you. Boy, you make me sound all fancy. I want to know what I say.
Well, you are fancy. You have accomplished so much. I'm so honored to have you. So let's start there. Let's go back in the memory lane and figure out how you got started, how you reached at this point, and what were
Yep.
some of the challenges you overcame during that journey.
Yeah, thanks. So interestingly, when I ask people that question, there's a phrase that I typically hear, Manoj, and it's fell into.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
you're
yeah.
you're not going to hear that phrase from me. You're not,
Uh-huh.
because so many people sort of fell into analytics and data science. I was very deliberate. I loved analytics and data science from day one. And when did day one happen? I know I'm dating myself here, but when I was I guess sophomore or junior year at Georgia State University, we were one of the only universities in the nation that had what was called at the time decision sciences. And I was a accounting major, which I hated, but I knew I liked numbers and I knew I kind of liked solving things. And I thought that was the closest I could find. But as soon as I took a decision science course, I was like, oh, this is the thing. This is the thing. Nobody knew what it was. And my parents even made fun of me because they were like, you're going to become a decision scientist? What is that?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's how the journey began. Since that time, uh, data science has always been what I love. It's always going to be what I love. Like I've always loved analytics. It's been my search. So I fall into three different, I use that term fell, but I fall into three different domains of the three legged stool. One is an academic one. Then there's the practitioner side where I'm, working for like client companies basically. And then there's a consulting side of me. And people think like, oh gosh, that must be so difficult. How do you like transfer from one to the next? But for me, it's all analytics and data science, just in different application areas.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that's how
That
it started.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I have been in the similar fields for a long time, although not as long as you within the data science specialization. But I feel that in the last 10 years, it has really taken off. It has really exploded. With the availability of multi-core CPUs, cloud computing, and obviously mobile devices producing so much data. So
Yep.
you have a different perspective and much longer perspective on this. So how have you seen the industry shift
Oh my
in the
gosh.
last few years?
Yeah, it's been amazing. Thank you for asking that question. So when I first got into it in 1991, the data sets were very small. The business questions were not very complex, mostly because people didn't realize you can even ask complex questions. And the analysis methods were fairly straightforward. So, here we're dealing with like relatively, smallish data sets of like how well did we serve the customers for Atlanta Gaslight or for Southern Company, and analyzing that to develop a model around explaining a certain phenomenon. So back then it was smaller data sets and simpler problems and easy techniques. Since that time, it's sort of from a personnel standpoint, it went from people saying, "Will you look at my computer for me? Isn't that what you do?" Like people just not getting it. This
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah, yeah.
understanding what the role is of an analytics
Right.
data science professional, to now it's computer vision and there's AI and there's machine learning and all this automated data science that's right around the corner. And we're doing so much more. So I think 10 years is probably a good threshold. I think about 10 years ago, I started realizing, wow, I have friends now. I can actually, I'm not all by myself as a weird person in the corner. But I started teaching decision science I taught a long time ago, but I started teaching statistics at Berry. And as I've moved along in my academic journey, even on the professor side, we started building more programs, and schools, not just Georgia State, but other schools started jumping into the mix. And now there are schools that have PhDs in data science in the state of Georgia and
Mhm.
elsewhere. So probably 10 years ago when that pivot happened, I think the starting point was probably digital, the web and looking at clicks and attribution modeling and those sort of fun things. And since then, it has just been amazing.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great, and I think we are all sort of without even realizing, many people are benefiting from that. I mean, self-driving cars are here, and Alexa is here, and Siri is here, and most people don't realize this. These are all basically powered by data.
Yeah.
Um, Now, one more thing that I really love about the way that you approach it, you're not only in academia, you're actually applying it in real life. After working with a lot of academics, I do see that when they just focus on academia, it becomes quite theoretical. But you are actually applying it in the real life. Like, how is that different for you? I mean, you must notice the way that you look at problems must be different, because you have so much knowledge from the field, from purely academic people. So do you find that a difference?
Yes. Yes. So in the United States, there are probably 10. We jokingly call each other pracademics.
Hmm.
They're practitioner academics. And for me, I've always sort of been geared that way. Like it's not enough to sort of talk about it in theory and conceptualize. I want to do it. I want to make a difference. I want to
Yeah.
leverage the data and make the discoveries and find the insights. So for me, I found a way to do that early on, because I started my journey as a practitioner and then got my PhD after I'd had some years under my belt, and then sort of have woven back and forth, because pure academia doesn't satisfy me, and pure practitioner doesn't
Yeah.
satisfy me. So I have to
Yeah.
have these woven sort of threads. And so what I've done, Manoj, is that when I was at Georgia Tech, I started an analytics center. We called it the Business Analytics Center. And the Analytics Center was a connector between academic and industry kind of worlds. And the center did different sorts of things, including class projects. So, and I was always doing class projects. I mean, even when I started teaching in 2000, I always did experiential
Mhm.
learning class
Mhm.
projects, even at Berry with the Excel spreadsheets. I mean, way back in the day. So the use of a real project has been challenging for some. So when I first started Georgia Tech, and now I'm at University of South Carolina, and I'm standing up the center over there doing the same thing. I'm running projects through the classes, running projects through competitions, things like that. It's still a little bit of a difficult thing to sort of communicate with my academic colleagues. For
Yeah.
example, this past week, I actually had this conversation with one of my colleagues where we have a doctoral student that's supporting the one of the classes, and she had sort of told the doctoral student, okay, you're going to be doing a bunch of Python and R and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, this is a 5 milestone project.
Yeah.
One milestone is the actual analysis,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I want them to frame the problem. I want them to create the hypothesized model. I
Yeah.
want them,
Yeah.
they've got all these steps and you only want
Yeah.
him to help with the one. So it's a different it is it's a different environment to actually do
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
work instead of talking about conceptualizing and just thinking about it as a quant function.
Absolutely. That's great. No, I'm glad that we are seeing that happen. Meaning hands-on sort of projects where students get to really feel what real world means. Um, Now, taking this point further, I talk to a lot of executives. I talk to a lot of founders, entrepreneurs. Even though we have made a lot of progress in the 10 years or so, people are still confused about, okay, what does data do for me? So can you share with us some impactful projects that you worked on, give some examples of how data actually help businesses, so that we can shed some light for the audience that data is so powerful. This is what data can do for you and your business.
Yeah, absolutely. My project experience comes from the three different domains, from overseeing consulting projects and sometimes actually doing them myself, from the class projects and competitions that I do through universities. And then thirdly, I operate a nonprofit and through Technology Association of Georgia. And so we do projects through that. And I used to own or co-founded another nonprofit where we did something similar. So now I've just moved it to Technology Association of Georgia. So I would say, kind of to give you a couple of flavors from each of those, but the nonprofit as an example, we had a project. It's one of my favorite projects that had to do with how do we help this organization do what it does better. Well, this particular organization helped people recover from opioid addiction,
Oh,
opioid
wow.
and other
Yeah,
addictions, and so
yeah,
it's really intense.
yeah, yeah.
And, me being me, I'm like, hey, context is so important. I
Yeah.
want the teams to actually talk to people with an opioid addiction.
My goodness, that's awesome.
Yeah, and so here we took a field trip and we went
Mm,
to the organization and we listened to these people during their meetings talk about their lives and what it's
mm.
like to stay clean from this addiction. And all of
Yeah,
a sudden the data meant something different to
yeah,
us.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah, exactly.
it
Yeah.
was intense. So I mean the value that you can get, you can literally save people's lives. Another example, this is also a life-saving example, just out of coincidence. I did four, or at least my team and I did four projects within like a year and a half. It was a weird trend that involved safety analytics, and so this
Mhm.
was in a manufacturing environment. One was in a retail environment. One was transportation. The fourth one was a warehouse environment, and so they were all looking at what are ways that we can, reduce the number of safety incidents that we have in our fill in the blank in the plant, in the store,
Mhm.
and whatever.
Mhm.
And so it was looking at things like OSHA recordable incidents, the severity, that sort of thing. And so it's funny, Manoj, because things that data can tell you that you would never see, like
Exactly,
this
exactly.
particular brand of forklift tended to
Yeah,
produce
yeah,
more incidents among, male drivers of these. I
yeah,
mean, just it's intriguing. So
yeah.
tons of value that can be had from these kinds of analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what you just said. Like, obviously, these are very, very impactful projects, and that's what people, sometimes don't realize, that it can actually have very life saving and life impacting impact. Just looking at data, and one point that you mentioned, which is very, very interesting to me as well. Like, as humans, we cannot even fathom some of the things that are happening in the real world, but the data can pick it up and show it to us. And we are all surprised by what data tells us.
Yeah, and one more if I can before we, because
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
of
would
course, of
I
course.
would feel bad if I didn't at least
Yeah,
mention
yeah, yeah, please.
my main field, or my favorite field, I will say, is customer experience. I love
Mhm.
the customer experience field, like understanding what makes people tick. And I've sort of joked about going back to school and getting a sociology PhD just because it's
Yeah,
so intriguing. And so the value that you can get from looking at the data to help understand things like customer loyalty, customer satisfaction, the experience, and what draws a consumer in is just incredible. once you start seeing the discoveries and the patterns within the data, it's just highly, highly valuable.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is another great point. Like I think that's what separates you from a lot of data scientists I have talked to, because engineering is a very hardcore field where you have to really focus on really the nuts and bolts of how the mechanics works. But at the end of the day, as you pointed out, we are trying to understand human beings, because data science is nothing else but to affect some change in the real world which affects humans, and if we don't understand them, their priorities, it's a moot point, right?
Yep, absolutely. Even when we were analyzing on each row was like a hotel chain or a
Yeah,
hotel brand. Even when you're analyzing things like that, it doesn't have to be that every row or
yeah.
record is a human. But when at the end of the day, when it all boils down, if you really think about it, it comes down to humans.
Exactly, exactly. And so, when you talk to the customers or people who are looking to implement this in their organizations, what is the level of education do you think is out there in executives and leaders, as uh, in terms of what is this data science thing all about? How can can it help my organization? Do you think that the awareness is rising, or is it still the same?
Well, it's funny. This is a great question. I was talking to a colleague, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we were talking about trends because I'm actually in the middle of conducting this survey. It's called Analytics Outlook 2022 about, trends and what people think is
Mhm.
sort of the future, at least for this year. What are we seeing happening? And one of the things that my colleague said, and she leads a data science team at a pretty major organization located in Atlanta. And she said, I feel like we're returning to BI. Is that
Mm,
possible? Like, how are we going backwards? And so I sort of I don't disagree. I've also noticed that some companies that wanted to specialize in data science have sort of said, okay, well, maybe it's more data engineering or more business intelligence, but not quite. So I think what's happened, Manoj, is we started this great aspirations to do advanced analytics, and all this fancy stuff and machine learning and everything. And I knew that someday it would, give us a little snip when I started hearing about the 85% non-application rate. Now, that's not a failure, but it's a commonly known stat that I think came from Gartner. A lot of projects that are done for analytics to answer and solve specific business questions don't actually get operationalized. They don't get
mm,
implemented. And that's not
mm.
even the algorithm getting integrated into a solution somewhere. We're just talking about, do they take the results and do something? Like just do
Yeah, yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
people just aren't. So I figured that we can't live like that forever. Can you imagine? Like, oh yeah, 85% of the haircuts didn't work. Like your hair's still the same. I
Why
mean,
it didn't work for me, for sure.
you would quit going.
Yeah.
And so I think what we're seeing is, yeah, more of a, and plus people were like, oh, I'm a baby. At the analytics maturity level was like infant, didn't even know how to crawl on their belly yet. And they're like, let's go to machine learning. I want to do some AI. I
Yeah,
literally
yeah,
heard people say, we just need to get some AI in here. What? No.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so I think we're starting as an industry, I feel like we're starting to get back to basics. And I think we're starting to accept that, man, you got to get your data right. You got to get your, if your senior leadership don't, if they don't understand or they don't know the KPIs, like if they're not walking around with that kind of knowledge or being able to get to it right away, you're never going to be able to truly absorb the full benefit of advanced analytics,
Yeah, yeah,
in data science. So
absolutely,
I think we're
absolutely.
getting a little bit back to that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I feel similar situation as well. What it boil, I mean, this is my sort of observation, and please tell me what you think about it. I think, you know, when people talk about data science, they know it is powerful, but I think they don't know how to ask the right questions.
Yes.
Hence, when the answers come, they don't know where to fit those answers. What do you think about
Oh gosh, how much time do we have? I forgot how much time we have.
that?
So there's this, I was going to say one last thing on that last comment, which leads right into what you just asked, is that I am encouraged though because I'm starting to see more job titles that say things like analytics enablement
Mm-hmm.
or data literacy. Like you can be a VP of data literacy now. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
that was never even a thing before.
yeah, yeah.
So I think that as part of the whole analytics enablement and data literacy trend, which is in a way the softer side, which I think is harder, but the
Mm.
softer side of analytics, as we're starting to see more of that, part of that challenge is problem framing. And this notion of problem framing, please check out Priyanka Jain's book,
Mm-hmm.
Behind Every Good Decision. I actually, if you don't want to check it out, I did a podcast on it with
Nice, nice.
Priyanka. So you Beverly Wright, Priyanka Jain, you'll find the
Yeah, yeah.
podcast. And she talks about this these upfront required conversations that have to happen to truly understand the problem that you're trying to solve. For example, I have a great example that I just did today with
Mm-hmm.
a major company headquartered in Atlanta that's working with one of my student groups in University of South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to decide between like, what are we really looking at? You know, and at the time they thought like, oh, we got it. We're good. You don't got it. Is
Yeah,
this there's a difference between, for example, there's a difference between employee well-being and employee loyalty and employee likely to recommend as an employer. You know, those are all very different constructs. Now, it doesn't
mm-hmm.
mean they're not connected. They're definitely connected to each other. But having the data literacy, especially among, you know, sort of top down in a way, but having executives that know how to frame problems, I think would go a long way to helping
Yeah,
us
yeah.
as a community become more effective.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I could not agree more. I mean, obviously, if we cannot define the problem, then the answers will be sort of meaningless. And that's what you're seeing, like when you say, 85% of them are not operational because there is no urgency for the organization to do anything about it.
Well, and the
Um,
challenge too is that I'm hearing people say, and I talk to my students about this all the time. If I hear them say, "Well, just let me see the data," like they try to rush through it, that's a kiss of death. When they start saying things like, "Well, I just need to see the data. Just let me see the
yeah,
data." Well, how do you know what data is even applicable? Like, how do you haven't even framed the business problem yet? What does this talk about seeing the data? You know, that
mm,
means that someone who's pulling the data must have framed the problem in their own head. And how do you know that you guys agree?
yeah, yeah.
Plus, once you see the data, you're automatically biased that, oh,
Bias, yeah, yeah,
the problem must have to do with the elements that are here. You know,
exactly.
so
No,
yeah, this is a good thing that we're starting to recognize the need to frame problems.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, talking about bias, I think bias is also a very contentious issue about data science and AI. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking to one of the largest telecom providers, and we were working on similar challenges like employee engagement. And one of the people who had worked in the field, he looked at few data set rows and said, "Oh, okay, I know this problem. I know exactly what is going on." I'm like, "How did you figure it out like so quickly?" "Oh, no, no, no. I have seen in this. I've seen this in the field." And then when I looked at, like, the rest of the data, I was like, "No, no, that is just top 5 rows. Look at the other set." So that bias is obviously a issue. How how do you approach bias? Like, how can we address this concern from people outside the data science community that, hey, AI and data should not be biased? What is your take on that?
Yeah. Well, there's bias in all and throughout the whole thing. The
Yeah.
the goal is to reduce it.
Mhm.
So if you're talking about bias and problem framing, the first thing I do is say, close your laptop.
Yeah, yeah.
Just don't even look at it. And the second thing I highly recommend is a whiteboard. Just hashing through the problems that you're trying to solve using some low tech method like a whiteboard
Yeah,
without looking at the data. So that's
yeah,
one
yeah.
way to kind of reduce the problem framing process
Mhm.
from the data itself. But the next stage is the bias that's actually in the data. And
Mhm.
there's no silver bullet for that. But if I had to give one piece of advice there, you gotta stay critical. Always
Mhm.
feel critically toward your data. Don't feel like, oh,
Mhm.
I just accept it as it is. The second thing I would say when you start getting to the analysis phase, because guess what? More bias.
Yeah,
You're going
yeah,
to have
yeah.
bias there. Is teams, whether it's my student teams or teams that work for me on the practitioner side, they want to jump right in and start building models. Don't do that. Spend time with EDA. Spend
Mhm.
like serious time really getting to know the data like the back of your hand. That's, I mean, if you don't know your ingredients and you're
Yeah,
baking some, culinary thing that's like just amazing,
yeah,
but
yeah,
you don't know anything about the ingredients or where they came from or how much they matter or what they taste like, you're going to have
yeah,
a really hard time knowing if your model's even good. So that's the
yeah, yeah.
third piece of advice I'd say is the EDA. And
Mhm.
then the last stage, not the last thing, but I'll say this thing last,
Mhm.
but the sort of later stage, after problem framing bias, the data bias, the analysis bias, and then the storytelling bias, is you really got to put yourself in the shoes of the person, but also be the objective truth seeker data scientist. So if you don't really understand where the business is coming from, where the consumer of the analytic and their perspective, where they're coming from, then you're going to have a really hard time telling the story in a way that resonates for them
Yeah, yeah,
without
yeah.
a ton of bias.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it comes down to the same sort of comment that we made earlier, that we need to understand human beings, because at the end of the day, the solution will be sort of presented to the human being. They will interpret it and then take action
Yep,
based on their interpretation.
absolutely.
Great. So data is, I mean, becoming the new oil. It's becoming the new gold. It is going to affect how we. It's already affecting how we live and work and play and all that. Uh, do you see, from your perspective, we have enough experts in the world who know, who can sort of usher us into this era of where data is everything? I mean, 5G is coming. It's just going to keep exploding, and uh, I don't see this slowing down. I think exponentially it is going to grow, our reliance on data. So how much expertise do we have? What do you foresee in terms of how many engineers are we producing? How many people understand all this stuff, maybe in the US or globally?
Yep. It's um it's a little frightening in some ways, especially I get a little nervous when I think about like cognitive computing, and programs that are programming, like
Mhm.
machines talking to machines, and when the human element gets sort of left out of the entire equation,
Yeah.
quite literally sometimes, that makes me a little nervous,
Mhm.
for our future, because I want to make sure that the black box
Yeah,
is a
yeah, yeah,
solid one, and that it's a
yeah,
good one, and it's an ethical one. So
yeah,
I know
yeah,
you didn't ask specifically about ethics, but I think this does bring up some ethical, considerations, and maybe even concerns might be a little too strong, but at least some ethical considerations. Because to answer your question, the I think the tools and the automation are sort of taken over. So it's impossible to think about like, well, gosh, we need to do 12 times more by tomorrow. So we need 12 times as many people. And I just don't think that that's the right way to go. And I don't think that's the way we're going to go. I think what we're
mhm,
going to see is we're going to have more powerful, and I say powerful as in people that really, really know and understand what's going on within the black box, creating mechanisms to make it possible for others that maybe are not deep data scientists to apply those sorts of things. And that does make me a tad worried that we're getting a push button kind of mentality, not to get on too much of a
mhm.
soapbox, but I worry that
Yeah,
there is a little bit of like push button, and that makes me feel uneasy, because I don't want, at the end of the day, I don't want decision makers to say, well, that's what the model produced. Like, I
yeah,
have
yeah,
no understanding of it at all. I
yeah,
don't know
yeah, yeah,
why, not even sure if it's right, but that's what the model produced. And so therefore we're going to change the entire strategy of the company,
yeah.
you know. But I think that's, unless we're more careful, I think that's the trend that I'm seeing, is this notion of like, well, we just trust the tool.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point. But bringing back our previous point about bias, if bias is going to harm us, I think it's that black box bias, because if only handful of people are making those black boxes, and as humans we all have our own biases, those biases will show up in those black boxes, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. For sure, absolutely. And that's the trick is how do we stay pure to being a truth seeker? Because that's what I think I am. That's what I think
Hmm.
my colleagues are and
Yeah,
should
yeah,
be,
yeah,
is
yeah,
that we're about seeking the truth. Like we don't
yeah,
hopefully we're not, tethering it to things like political gain or
yeah, yeah,
whatever. That it's just find the truth in the data
yeah,
based on a certain problem that we're trying to solve. And if we
yeah,
can stay true to truth seeking while at the same time considering the context and the life of the business person, of the person that's consuming the analytics, I think that's the magical combination. It's just really hard to get there.
yeah. No, that's true. Which leads me to the next question, which is the singularity. So a lot of these things, I mean, I'm guessing that as we approach singularity, some of these challenges may go away and new ones will be presented. What is your opinion about that singularity when AI is going to be more or equivalent to human intelligence, and when do you see that point happening in the future?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think by 2050 at the latest,
Oh,
I see.
really?
Yeah, I do. I unfortunately, I mean, if we keep going at this pace, I'm just I think I have a little more faith though that we're gonna find the right way to make these sort of things happen. That we're not just gonna stand by and let it. Again, I'm being a little optimistic here.
Yeah, yeah,
I've been watching Westworld, and it kind of makes me a little,
yeah.
fearful. I
Yeah,
just found that series. I know everybody else has already watched it. I don't normally watch television, but
mm,
anyway, I thought it was interesting. But yeah, I think by 2050 we'll start to see the catch up where we're right next to AI, and that it's enabling many of the decisions that we make. And
yeah,
in some ways it already is,
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
whether it's something really simple like your recommendations, since we're talking about consuming media, your
Mhm, mhm,
recommendations on Spotify or
mhm.
Netflix, those are minor kind of things. But then what if we're talking about like the type of surgery or the type of equipment that's used, and that can have life changing results? So time will only tell. I certainly am
Yeah,
not one to, be able to predict something like that, but we'll see.
yeah, yeah,
My biggest hope for that whole trend though is that we keep our eye on the ethics and that we pay
absolutely.
attention to the human condition and how we're going to manifest
Yeah,
around
yeah,
that.
absolutely. No, that's very interesting. 2050, because I've heard some numbers as short as like next 5 years, 10 years. So it's very interesting place in history. I think, I guess, our generation is going through.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for my flying car. I was promised a flying
Yeah,
car by
I
2010. Like,
think there are a couple of models out there. Prototypes are out there for the flying car.
yeah, yeah. Where's that? So I think as far as like everyday sort of application, I think it might take until 2050. We're a little
Yeah, yeah,
ambitious if we think it's going to be in 5 years, but who knows?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
hard to
yeah.
tell.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Like in the lab, it a little bit of it may be out there already, but who knows? All right. Well, one of the questions that I do like to ask is, you have accomplished so much in your career. Like, what kind of mentors or guide did you have who helped you when you needed them most, and what kind of impact these mentors had on your career and life?
Yeah. I actually did not understand the value or, really appreciate or even leverage mentorship until I started becoming a mentor,
I
which
see,
is
I see.
terrible. That's why I tell my students, like, get a mentor. And then they always
Yeah,
ask me, and I'm like, not me, not me, not me.
yeah,
Get somebody else.
yeah.
Get a different mentor. But I've got some really great mentors now. And the funny thing is I actually called one of my mentors, his name's Eric, and it was like maybe 3 weeks ago. And I said, hey, it's something like, hey, I need to talk to my mentor. And it's like, take off your hat and put on your mentor hat. And he was like, what? I'm not your mentor. You're my mentor. What do you mean? And so a lot of times it's like that. So
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
got mentors that career wise, are on my level, if you want to call it that, or above my level. I've got some that are former students. This one in particular, his name is Gavin. He's a former student. He is a great mentor. And again, if
yeah.
I said that to him, he would be like, I'm not your mentor, you're my
Yeah, yeah,
mentor.
yeah.
But that's anyway. So I think along the path, they each contribute something differently. Like Gavin is a really great mentor when it comes to just real life. How do you fit this? I mean, because he knows how I am about analytics. I have this like passion. It's ridiculous. Like it exudes from me. Like people can
Mhm.
smell my passion.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
had a colleague from Blue Cross Blue Shield today talking about like your passion sucked me in. It's just
Yeah, yeah.
so people see that, and so for him to really get that, he's good at helping me understand the balance and that how to sort of integrate and fit it all into real life. Other mentors have helped with career pathing, which is something I try to push my students and my colleagues toward. A lot of people do sort of fall into a career, and then they just continue to let that sort of happen. Like, oh, well, this happened and that happened. And yeah, absolutely. I've had to move. I've had parental things happen where I had to take care of, my parents at some points in life. I've had kids. I've had all kinds of events. And I mean, I'm sort of having an event right now, and I'm trying to figure out how to navigate around that. But that's what mentors are for, is they help you with career pathing. They help you with decision making. And most of all, I think they help you just see things more clearly.
Yeah, yeah, that's very good. Very, very true as well. I've had very impactful mentors in my life, but the thing is, like, even one conversation could really change the course of your life, and that's the impact that they have. So I'm glad you have a community of mentors around you. So that's great. This has been a very, very interesting conversation. Thank you so much. I'm so honored that I got to talk to you and learn your perspective on data science, and absolutely your passion shines through. Now, before I let you go, can you tell us how people can get in touch with you if they want to connect with you and interact with you?
Yeah, I mean, really, the best way is through LinkedIn, since everybody's on LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Beverly Wright, Ph.D, CAP, Certified Analytics Professional, is the right way to go. And I oftentimes post things that are free to the community or low cost types of learning activities or gatherings. Like I have a regular conference that I put together, and I've got my other podcast, that I'm doing. So um, just follow me on LinkedIn or connect with me on LinkedIn, and that's probably the best way to get hold of me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We'll add those your profile link into the show notes.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thank you
Manish.
so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.